WLRN edition 122 in 3, 2, 1.
I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Sisters, rise again. I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Rise and rise again.
Greetings and welcome to the 122nd edition podcast of Women's Liberation Radio News for this Thursday, June 4th, 2026. This is Kat, newsreader, songwriter and Southern Hemisphere correspondent for WLRN. This month's edition focuses on the importance of lesbian-only spaces, a topic I chose. We'll hear an excerpt of an interview I did with Nicole from the Lesbian Action Group. We'll also hear commentary on this topic from Jocelyn Crawley, so stay tuned for all that at the end of the show. This commentary focuses on the intersections between female-only and lesbian-only spaces, and how the development of both is a logical, ethical response to the ubiquity and perpetuity of male violence against women. The team at WLRN produces a monthly radio broadcast to break the sound barrier women are blocked by under the status quo rule of men. This blocking of women's discourse we see in all sectors of society, be they conservative, liberal, mainstream, progressive, or radical. The thread that runs through all of American politics, except for separatist feminism, is male dominance and entitlement in all spheres. To start off today's edition, here's women's news from around the globe for this Thursday, June 4th. On May 15th, the Federal Court of Australia upheld their previous decision that found Australian woman Sal Grover guilty of discrimination by banning biological male Roxy Tickle from her female-only social media app Giggle for Girls. Miss Grover had previously been charged with indirect discrimination for removing Mr. Tickle from the app based on his sex. However, the revised decision found her guilty of direct discrimination after Mr. Tickle's legal team argued that Miss Grover's conduct during the trial, including referring to Mr. Tickle as male, constituted further discrimination. Miss Grover is now being asked to pay Mr. Tickle $20,000 in damages and to cover his legal fees up to $100,000. The judges found Miss Grover guilty based on the Sex Discrimination Act, which was amended in 2013 by then Prime Minister Julia Gillard to remove definitions of male and female, as well as add the protected characteristics of sexual orientation and gender identity. The court's decision prompted widespread criticism of these amendments, including a commitment by federal opposition leader Angus Taylor of the centre-right Liberal Party to restore the Act to its original wording if elected. Mr. Taylor said that the outcome confirmed that Australian law does not properly protect single-sex spaces for women and girls. Outrage at the decision was not limited to Australia, with women in the UK holding a protest in solidarity with Miss Grover outside the Australian High Commission in London on May 23rd. Following the court ruling, Julia Gillard was also heckled by women's rights advocates when speaking at the Hay on Wye Literary Festival in the UK on May 25th, with a protester interrupting her speech to ask, "What about Sal Grover?" Two women in Botswana have launched a court case claiming their right to same-sex marriage, with the hearing scheduled for July 14th and 15th. Bonolo Selelo and Sholofelo Kumile got engaged in 2024 and in 2025 visited a local government office to register their intent to marry. The registration was rejected, leading to the court case. Same-sex relations were decriminalised in Botswana in 2019, with the decision upheld on appeal in 2021. However, the Botswanan Attorney General argues that a valid marriage is only between a man and a woman in the traditional sense, and that the Marriage Act does not provide for same-sex marriages. On May 13th, Ireland's Parliament voted down a bill that would have improved women's reproductive rights by abolishing the country's mandatory 3-day waiting period for access to abortion. The bill would also end the criminalisation of doctors, who currently face jail terms of up to 14 years for providing abortions outside the constraints of current Irish law. Current law allows for termination of pregnancies where there is a serious risk to the woman's life or health, or a condition likely to lead to death of the fetus within 28 days of birth. The proposed bill would have removed this 28-day limit. The bill, proposed by the Social Democrats, was defeated by 85 votes to 30, with 36 abstentions. A UK study released on May 25th found that major films are more likely to star a man named Chris than a woman over the age of 60. Of the 100 highest grossing films from the last 3 years, 6 featured a lead actor named Chris and only 5 featured a female lead over 60. The same study found that films were 4 times more likely to have a talking animal as the lead character, compared to a woman over 60. Polls conducted by the Age Without Limits campaign revealed that the British public wants more films made with older female leads, and the call has been echoed by award-winning actress Dame Emma Thompson, who stated, "Women are half the population and we get older, so where are the stories about us? The older we get, the more interesting we are. I want to see more films centre ageing women. We are compelling, relatable, and overdue for centre stage. Older women don't need permission to exist on screen. They already exist in the world, cinema just needs to catch up." A previous study from 2023 found that whilst ageism in film is a problem in general, female characters aged 65 and over were 3 times less likely to be featured in British films compared to men of the same age. A new decree issued by the Taliban last month is expected to increase instances of child marriage in Afghanistan. Child marriage is a long-standing issue under Taliban rule, with a 2021 UNICEF report estimating that 28% of Afghan women aged 15 to 49 had been married before the age of 18. The new law is focused primarily on divorce, but contains several articles recognising child marriages. One of these articles states that the guardian of a child has the right to arrange a legally binding marriage for a minor, and another allows the silence of a virgin girl who has reached puberty to be taken as consent to marriage. Previous laws had considered silence as consent, however had included a minimum age of 15. A 2023 study found that 69% of respondents in Afghanistan knew a girl who had been married at an inappropriate age. The new law has drawn strong criticism from both within and outside Afghanistan. One of the founders of the Afghan Women's History Transformation Movement has called this new law one of the most worrying legal developments in Afghanistan under the Taliban. A group of anonymous masked women activists, identified as the Women's Courage Movement, shared a video showing them graffitiing the message "No to Child Marriage" on the walls of an unidentified Afghan town. The UN's assistance mission in Afghanistan referred to the decree as another step in the erosion of Afghan women and girls' rights. In a historic first, Israel has allowed women to sit the official rabbinic examinations administered by the country's Orthodox religious authorities. Until now, these exams were reserved exclusively for men and form part of the pathway to recognition as an Orthodox rabbi. The change follows years of legal challenges by women seeking equal access to advanced religious study and recognition. 3 Orthodox Jewish women recently completed the demanding examinations, marking a significant milestone in a religious system where formal authority remains overwhelmingly male-dominated. However, the breakthrough comes with limitations. Whilst women can now take the exams and receive certain professional benefits associated with passing them, they are still barred from being ordained as Orthodox rabbis. Supporters describe the move as a long overdue acknowledgement of women's religious scholarship. Critics argue it remains an incomplete victory, granting access to the test whilst maintaining barriers to full religious leadership. As the US moves toward the 2026 midterm elections, some Democratic strategists are reconsidering how they talk about abortion rights with voters. Since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, abortion has been a powerful mobilizing issue for Democrats, with Democratic candidates spending more on campaign ads about abortion than any other issue in both the 2022 and 2024 elections. This year, candidates have spent almost 4 times less on ads about this issue. Recent polling suggests that today's voters are more focused on the rising cost of living, housing affordability, and economic insecurity. Rather than abandoning abortion rights as a campaign issue, some Democratic candidates are attempting to connect reproductive freedom to the economy, arguing that access to contraception, abortion care, and medications such as mifepristone can have major financial consequences for women and families, particularly those already struggling with rising costs. The debate reflects a larger question facing the party: how to defend reproductive rights whilst also responding to voters' concerns about everyday affordability. Some campaign strategists believe abortion remains a winning issue when framed as part of a wider conversation about personal freedom, healthcare access, and economic security. With Republicans continuing to pursue restrictions on abortion in many states, Democrats are seeking messaging that keeps reproductive rights on the agenda without losing sight of the economic pressures dominating voters' lives. After more than a decade of advocacy and international consultation, polycystic ovary syndrome, commonly known as PCOS, has officially been renamed to polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome, or PMOS. The condition affects roughly 1 in 8 women worldwide and is one of the most common hormonal disorders affecting female health. Supporters of the change say the old name was misleading because many women with the condition do not have ovarian cysts, while the name itself obscured the broader metabolic and hormonal impacts of the disorder. Experts argue that focusing on the ovaries alone contributed to delayed diagnoses, fragmented treatment, and a widespread misunderstanding of the condition. PMOS better reflects the reality that the syndrome can affect metabolism, cardiovascular health, mental health, fertility, and insulin regulation throughout a woman's life. The renaming follows a global consultation involving thousands of patients, researchers, and healthcare professionals. Advocates hope the new terminology will improve public understanding, reduce stigma, and encourage more comprehensive medical care and research funding. Critics of the name change are concerned it could lead to confusion and complicate existing research and resources. For many women living with the condition, the change is also symbolic recognition that their experiences extend beyond reproductive health alone. A dispute over women's right to female-only spaces has erupted at a women's shed in regional Victoria, Australia, after a former board member was removed from the organisation and warned not to return. According to the shed's leadership, the woman entered the facility and argued that female members were not safe in the presence of biological males. The women's shed, which describes itself as an inclusive organisation, said the comments amounted to misinformation and were contrary to its values. The group, based in Ballarat, reaffirmed that it remained inclusive of all who self-identify as women. Management said the former member left when asked and has been warned that police will be contacted if she returns. The incident has attracted national attention and highlights a growing divide within women's organisations across Australia. While some groups have adopted policies based on gender identity and inclusion, others argue that women should be free to organise on the basis of biological sex and to discuss concerns about female-only spaces without facing sanctions. A Canadian women's rights organisation has won 2 significant procedural victories in its legal challenge to a policy that allows male prisoners who identify as women to be housed in women's federal prisons. The case was brought by Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights, which argues that the policy places incarcerated women at risk and violates their rights under Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The organisation is being supported by the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. In a ruling handed down on May 14th, the federal court rejected the federal government's attempt to have the case dismissed before trial. The court found that the claim raises legitimate constitutional questions and that it is not obvious the challenge has no chance of succeeding. The court also granted Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights public interest standing, allowing the group to pursue the case on behalf of federally incarcerated women. The judge accepted arguments that women in prison may be reluctant to bring legal action themselves due to concerns about retaliation, institutional consequences, or effects on parole decisions. The ruling does not determine whether the prison policy is lawful. Instead, it clears the way for the constitutional challenge to proceed, setting up what could become a significant test case in Canada's ongoing debate over sex-based rights, gender identity policy, and the safeguarding of vulnerable women in custodial settings. That concludes WLRN's World News segment for this Thursday, June 4th, 2026. I'm Kat Bradfield. Share your news stories, announcements, and tips with us by emailing info@wlrnmedia.com and letting us know what's going on.
You are listening to WLRN.
Hey, 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 more than friends, more than friends, more than friends. I paused before an open door and decided to see her face. Her eyes are full of wisdom and her hair a silky lace. She has a bulldog's courage and she has a simple grace. She's sturdy as an old pine tree, she's one I can't replace. Oh, how I love her, she's my oldest friend. She's a warm glow in the evening when the day comes to an end. She's sweeter than the mountain flower blooming once again. By the way we love each other, you can tell we're more than friends. There's berries in the patch, it's boggy grass down by the lake. The wind is barely breathing and I feel I'm half awake.
That was Robin Flower with her 1979 song, More Than Friends, thought to be the first recorded bluegrass song to feature lesbian or gay themes. She was an out and proud lesbian at the time of its release. Next up, we'll hear excerpts of an interview Kat did with Nicole Mowbray about the importance of lesbian-only spaces. Nicole is a spokesperson for the Lesbian Action Group, a Melbourne-based group dedicated to the promotion and protection of lesbian rights.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks for agreeing to come on the WLRN podcast. Would you like to start by giving us a bit of a background about what LAG is and the legal fights you've been involved in the last couple of years?
So LAG stands for Lesbian Action Group, and we came together after the Let Women Speak rally in Melbourne in 2023, I think it was. We were quite horrified by what's going on for women's rights and particularly for lesbian rights. And we decided to test the law. Lesbians have not been able to have public gatherings, as in be able to advertise, at least since the early 2000s, because of the laws. And we have to apply for a legal exemption in order to gather publicly in single-sex space. We can meet in mixed-sex space without an exemption, but in order to have single-sex space, we have to have the exemption. So we applied for an exemption. We decided we'll apply for an exemption and we'll see what happens. So we decided that International Lesbian Day on the 8th of October every year, we would approach the Pride Centre in Melbourne and see if we could book a room so we could have a lesbian-only event on International Lesbian Day at the government-funded Pride Centre, multi-million-dollar facility. Yes, so we applied for the exemption and we also applied to the Pride Centre for a room, hoping that we'd have our exemption in our hands so we could advertise it as being a lesbian-only event for biological females. The Pride Centre knocked back our application for a room because it wasn't inclusive. And of course, everything has to be inclusive now. There's no room to be exclusive. And the Australian Human Rights Commission knocked back our application for the exemption. So what an exemption does is it enables you to legally discriminate, okay? And it's particularly used in things like female-only gyms. So places like, I don't know if I can say the name, the name of the gym.
We're not for profit. You're allowed to say brand names.
Okay.
Places
like Fernwood Gym have an exemption, a single-sex exemption, so it can be just for women. Places like refuges have single-sex exemptions so that they can be staffed by females only. Although I gather they're getting harder and harder to get.
I was going to say, with the Sex Discrimination Act not really functioning as it should, are those exemptions, are they actually making it single sex? Because I know we've got the issues with some of these men wanting to get into the gyms, get into the refuges.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So they are getting much harder to get, I gather. A friend of mine who works in the refuge movement said it's getting harder to get single-sex exemptions. So the exemption is so that we can have single-sex space, basically, and legally discriminate against anyone who's not a female. And in our case, anyone who's not a lesbian. So that was knocked back. The exemption was knocked back. And it made news. It made the news. And we weren't quite sure what our next move would be, but our legal team found us after reading what had happened. And they said, we'd love to represent you. So they were a legal team looking for a cause, and we were the cause. And so it's been a match made in heaven, basically. And so we were able to go to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal against the Australian Human Rights Commission and had our case heard over 2 days. And the tribunal, they said they've favoured the Australian Human Rights Commission. They said you can legally discriminate. We can give you an exemption to legally discriminate against heterosexual men, gay men, heterosexual women, bisexual people, but you're not allowed to discriminate against trans women who are males. So then we went to the federal court, and that's, of course, where we've just been. So that's a bit of the background of how it's all come about. Was we wanted to test the law and see how the law would work or not in the case of having single-sex space.
I guess what's so important to lesbians about being able to organise autonomously? Like, why do we really need these spaces?
Well, if you were around the lesbian scene in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you would have seen a thriving lesbian community. I'm from Melbourne, and you could pretty much go out any night of the week and go to a lesbian-only something, a pool night, a dance, a club. There were numerous events held for lesbians, just lesbians, And because lesbians, we're exclusively attracted to other women, we're not really interested in having males in our spaces. It's important to us to be able to have that single-sex space. Same for gay men, they're not interested in socialising. I mean, there are times when we are interested in socialising in mixed groups, things like Mardi Gras or Midsummer Festival. We're quite happy to come together in mixed-sex space, but it's also important for us to be able to have single-sex space, especially things like, when you're trying to meet a partner and that kind of thing. You're not interested in having blokes around.
I guess when did, as someone who was there in the times where we did have these lesbian-only spaces, when did you sort of start to notice the downturn and these communities and culture disappearing?
So older lesbians, I remember older lesbians back then in the 90s, there were issues with trans-identified males who identified as lesbians wanting to come into our spaces. It wasn't a huge problem then because we still had the law on our side. But I remember it was the early 2000s that things really started to change, because that's when the laws started to change. And there was at least two or three court cases in Australia where trans-identified males took lesbians to court because they were excluded from our events. And it got expensive and it got stressful. And so the lesbian community went underground at that point. So we didn't publicly advertise our events anymore. We weren't able to because everyone and their dog would turn up. And so everything's word of mouth. So we're really no better off than we were before the marriage laws came in. I say that the irony in all of this is that we can legally marry now, but we can't legally gather in single-sex space anymore.
What was the culture, the scene like before the law and these men sort of shut it all down?
It was thriving, Kate, absolutely thriving. And there's a bunch of us at the moment we're going through a huge amount of archives, and there's a huge amount of stuff that survives from those days, and we're putting it all together in an exhibition just to show the world what we had. And it was a thriving community.
Yeah, I guess a lot of the fight that I see for these single-sex lesbian spaces is coming from that older generation who got to experience that. How can we convey this importance to the younger generations who never got to experience this and don't know what they're missing?
Well, it's very difficult. We find a lot of the younger generation, I think, have been brainwashed by, queer ideology and trans ideology, and you don't really see any butch baby dykes around these days. They all think that they're trans men. So a lot of them, I think, are lost to us, you know. And I think a big push of queer ideology and trans ideology is the erasure of homosexuality, to be honest. And I
Yeah,
feel,
I've definitely seen that a lot. I guess growing up as a lesbian in this new age, like pretty much every lesbian I went to high school with doesn't identify as a woman now.
yeah, right. Yeah, I get it. And it's heartbreaking for us older lesbians who have had this thriving community. And, you know, the butch girls did have gender dysphoria. I don't doubt that that doesn't exist. I've had it myself. You know, I'm a gender non-conforming lesbian. But you just live with it. You know, it doesn't mean you have to take hormones or pretend you're something that you're not. So the younger ones, when they find us, we've set up a club because we can legally meet as a private club and exclude whoever we like. And younger lesbians are finding us. And honestly, some of the tales they're telling us of life under the queer umbrella is horrifying. The sexual harassment, the cotton ceiling stuff that's going on, you know, of these males that think they're lesbians and think that young lesbians are interested in having sex with them. It's terrible rape culture as far as I'm concerned. And that's why a lot of us older lesbians are fighting this, because we know what it was like, and we don't want young lesbians to ruin their bodies and to deny their sexuality and to deny that they're female. It's you can have a really good life as a lesbian.
Yeah, and I guess not having the lesbian culture that we used to have, you just don't have that visibility of people living their lives happily as lesbians.
Exactly. And younger lesbians can't find their people. They are forced teamed into queer culture, you know. They're forced teamed into mixed sex space. I gather there's quite a pressure for young gay and lesbian people to take on a queer or a trans identity, you know, and to deny their identity as a gay or lesbian person. And we see this with detransitioners, of course, who come out of this the other end and say, I was just gay, you know, I was just a lesbian. I didn't need my body to be changed. There's nothing wrong with me the way I was. So I see it as a horribly homophobic movement. It really is. And there are a lot of us out there who are fighting like heck to get our you know, rights reinstated to have single sex space so that the young ones can find their people. It's so important.
I guess in the wake of the recent Giggle versus Tickle decision, obviously Sal lost her case, but it seems to have sparked a lot more public discussion of the issue.
It certainly has.
Yeah, I guess where do you think things might go from here?
Oh, it's so hard to know. It really is. I think Sal's wanting to go to the High Court. I gather the High Court gets something like 800 applications a year and they hear 40 cases out of those 800. So it's not a given that she'll get a hearing at the High Court. I sincerely hope that she does. But we've got to get that legislation changed. And we've got to get ACON out of all of these government departments, brainwashing people that, you know, humans can change sex. It's craziness.
Do you want to speak a bit more on ACON and their influence? Because I'd say probably a lot of the listeners haven't necessarily heard of ACON.
Right, okay. Well, back in the day, back in the 80s when AIDS was a big epidemic, and I lived through that, I was a young lesbian during the AIDS epidemic, and it was absolutely devastating on the gay men's community, and it also affected the lesbian community because when a lot of the rest of the world were turning their back on gay men, lesbians stepped up to, you know, nurse them because no one else would. And I think back then that's when the gay and lesbian community sort of came together as a more united entity. Prior to that, we were, you know, the gay men did their thing and we did our thing, and we just kind of coexisted that way. Anyway, out of the AIDS epidemic grew ACON, which was the AIDS Council of New South Wales, and they've become the biggest, queer organisation now. But back then they did great work for gay men and bisexual men who were dying in droves. And then they've just become this sort of queer, they push queer ideology in public organisations such as the Public Service, the Australian Human Rights Commission, the federal court, the court system, the school system. They are in there everywhere. It's called the Australian Workplace Equality Index, and organisations get brownie points for signing up and for promoting queer ideology. So if an organisation signs up and they, for example, put in unisex toilets, they get brownie points with ACON. And then ACON have this big kind of award ceremony where if you get the highest number of points, you get, a big award kind of thing. And the ABC were very, very signed up to ACON for many years, to the point where they basically became a propaganda mouthpiece for ACON. So every time they had to put on a queer article or something about trans this, trans that, trans the other, they got brownie points with ACON, and they reached platinum status, which is like, the highest kind of level you can go in ACON. So ACON has really gone from its original remit of looking after gay men during the AIDS crisis to pushing and promoting an erasure of homosexual people. It's quite astonishing. Really is. Because queer and trans just trump anything to do with, kids are being told that being homosexual is, you're a dinosaur, the cool thing is to be trans or queer. And that's been promoted and pushed by ACON and all the other major LGBTIQ plus organisations such as Equality Australia. As far as I can see, they are the marketing arm of the trans medical industrial complex. And if you're a young gay or lesbian person and you don't know where the gay and lesbian people have gone because we've gone underground, you've got no choice but to come out to an LGBTIQ plus organisation who are putting on compulsory mixed sex events and pushing the trans narrative. I gather that the pressure to take on a trans or a queer identity is really strong.
Do you think that the tide might be starting to turn with ABC dropping ACON? And I don't know if you've seen the stories where the Gen Alpha kids are finding the whole pronoun thing to be cringe.
Yes, and that gives me great hope that things are starting to change. Yeah, because a lie this big, a lie that mammals can change sex cannot be sustained, and gay and lesbian people have always been traditionally gender non-conforming, effeminate gay men and butch lesbians. It's well known, and it's also well known that gender non-conforming kids in the vast majority of cases grow up to be gay or lesbian. I was a tomboy, I grew up to be a lesbian. It's just so well known, and I see these large LGBTIQ plus organisations as being the recruiting ground for gender confused, same-sex attracted kids to be put on a medicalised pathway. And yeah, as I said, a lie that big can't be sustained. It's gay conversion. And we have to speak out about it. We really have to speak out about it because it's ruining lives. It really is. It's ruining bodies. It's ruining minds. It's ruining just, kids who would normally grow up to be same-sex attracted. It's terrible. Yeah.
I guess how can we sort of help with making lesbians more visible, making it clear to these kids and to my generation, the lost generation of lesbians, that there's nothing wrong with being a same-sex attracted woman. It doesn't make you any less female, and Yeah, we actually do need our own autonomous spaces sometimes.
We do, we certainly do. And I don't know, because the mainstream LGBTIQ plus organisations have been so incredibly successful in converting these kids, so incredibly successful in getting them on that medicalised pathway. And I don't know, how we turn it around. We're trying to do it through the courts in order to claw back, the right to single sex space. I think if we can do that and have single sex space, there'll be somewhere publicly visible where younger people can find their community. The other thing is that they've done is that they've turned a whole generation of young gay and lesbian kids against the older ones, saying that we're, bigoted TERFs who hate trans people. So I gather a lot of young who now take on the queer identity, they hate us. And that's another form of homophobia that's been manufactured by this movement.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see a lot of that sort of indoctrination in the university settings. I mean, we had the queer
Absolutely.
collective, and I didn't come to my senses until after graduating.
Right. When I
Because
was
I
at
was just so, I
university,
spent 4 years in the propaganda machine, as
right,
does anyone who gets a uni degree.
absolutely. When I was at university, we had a women's officer and we had a lesbian and a gay society, and that was it. And there was no such thing as, gender studies, it was women's studies.
Mm.
It's all been taken over. And that's another path and avenue where this is all being, fed to young people to brainwash them. And because it really is. Yeah. How did you get out of that?
I honestly can't remember.
Right.
I think I sort of had beef with the queer collective over other issues, and I think just distancing myself from them showed me other perspectives.
Yeah. So through the Lesbian Club, we've set up a younger lesbians online group where they can all meet, and that's proved to be very popular because young lesbians are telling us how lonely and isolated they are. They're not interested in hanging out with transvestitic men who think that they're lesbians. They want to find their own people. And so setting up that group has been really beneficial. And they're even getting young lesbians from around the world in there now, because there's nothing, for young lesbians, it's a worldwide problem. It's not just an Australian problem. It's happened to lesbians across the planet.
No, it's really good that LAG and you guys have been able to create this sort of oasis from homophobia.
I see this as I'm retired now, but this is how I'm going to be spending the rest of my life is, trying to claw back what we used to have. And because I came out in 1986 when I was 19 to a thriving lesbian community. And that community gave me so much. I came from a middle-class conservative background that did not accept me as a lesbian woman. And I got, they were there to catch me and to show me how to live as a lesbian woman in the world successfully. So, this is my way of giving back to the lesbian community after, when I came out. I know how difficult it is. It can be really hard. And there needs to be somewhere for young and newly emerging lesbians to find their people and to be supported.
Do you think we'll ever get back to that same level of community that there was in the 70s and 80s?
I hope so. I really hope so. I don't know because the community has been so split by this issue, that whole kind of divide and conquer. It's been remarkably successful in dividing the gay and lesbian community. There's the lesbians who really want single-sex space, and then the lesbians who think that we're evil, bigoted TERFs that, shouldn't have any rights. And it's the same for gay men. I know it's been a problem for them as well, because they're seeing a lot of trans men in their spaces who are wanting to have sex with them. You know, gay men aren't interested in sex with females. And it's horribly homophobic to expect that they would, no matter how that female identifies. So, look, I don't know if we can, you know, have that rich, vast community that we used to have. I just don't know if it's possible anymore, given what's happened, you know. Only time will tell. But we're doing what we can do. We're doing what we can do in order to try and, you know, have a little haven away from the rest of the world. Yeah.
No, I really hope we can get that culture again.
Absolutely.
It's just hearing about it, like, I feel like I was born in the wrong era, because I didn't get to experience any of this. By the time I came on the scene was gone.
It's gone, absolutely. Yeah. And we know that we've lost at least a generation of young lesbians to this, you know, that are in such denial that they're female, they're in denial that they're same-sex attracted. They think that by changing their bodies it's going to make them into some kind of faux heterosexual. There's at least a generation who have been lost to this. It's terrible. It really is. For an older lesbian such as myself, it breaks my heart. It really does. It's the decimation of the lesbian culture. Yeah. So we just do what we can do to try and, you know, turn things around. But yeah, it's I'm glad that there's younger lesbians speaking up about this.
Thanks so much for talking to me today about this. Wishing LAG all the best in their future legal battles and recruitment. Thanks. And I really hope that we can get that lesbian culture back someday.
Back. Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
You are listening to WLRN, brought to you by the totally excellent radical feminists at Women's Liberation Radio News.
As Trump continues to run the country into the ground and exemplify the aspect of male supremacy, which includes demonstrating an utter disregard for all sentient life, radical women are once again witnessing how patriarchal principles adversely impact female people. In addition to restricting abortion access and defunding reproductive health services, Trump's administration has reinstated a global gag rule which blocks U.S. global health funding for organizations that advocate, discuss, or provide HIV prevention services, maternal health, and contraceptive access for women all over the world. In recognizing how Trump and his oligarchy have entrenched patriarchal principles and ensured their perpetuation and proliferation all over the world, women are once again recognizing the importance of establishing women-only spaces where they are less susceptible to the deleterious harms that result from attempting to share space with misogynistic men who want to reduce them to breeders, sex objects, handmaids, and robotic housewives who perform all aspects of the first, second, and third shifts with slavish obedience. Because many, if not most, heterosexual women who claim to care about women's rights are relatively complicit with the practice of cohabitating with men, the class of people who are most likely to kill or abuse them, the issue of developing women-only spaces is oftentimes placed on the back burner in mainstream political work and daily life, as discourse is instead directed towards how women and men can learn to cohabitate peacefully. Meanwhile, we all watch female people being subjected to sex traffic, abuse through pornography, domestic violence, and various other harms that transpire within the heterosexual matrix specifically, and the world generally. Unlike heterosexual women, many lesbian women are oftentimes less invested in developing romantic and/or platonic relationships with men, and they are oftentimes more invested in creating male-free spaces which enable women to organize politically, embrace feminist love, and engage in other activities that are conducive to female vitality. Thus, the cultivation of lesbian-only spaces is pragmatic for both political and personal reasons. Those who claim ideological alignment with radical feminists who seek to build a world that is free of patriarchy through the cultivation of female-only and or lesbian-only spaces often question why these domains of reality must be male-free. Shouldn't, they often argue, we be cultivating spaces in which members of both sexes can coexist peacefully? Not necessarily, and this is an important concept for individuals seeking more understanding regarding how male supremacy operates and how to resist it should seek awareness about. For centuries, men have been able to create male-only spaces for the purpose of consolidating power, excluding women, and developing strategies which ensured their socioeconomic growth. Because these male-only spaces are largely produced for the purpose of reinforcing privilege and exclusion, they are morally questionable and should be contended. Female-only spaces, on the other hand, are typically not designed to promote principles of exclusion and privilege. Rather, they generally exist to create safe spaces for women, providing female people with opportunities to develop emotional security, build confidence, attain mentorship services, and cultivate leadership skills without patriarchal intrusion. Thus, rather than emphasizing the principles of exclusion and privilege that patriarchy and male-only spaces are rooted in, radical female spaces are about fostering a sense of inclusivity in which female people experience a sense of belonging, while also challenging and thwarting various forms of socioeconomic and political privilege, which would enable people with more race-based or class-rooted privilege to gain access to life-giving resources, while less privileged individuals are relegated to spheres of poverty and lack. While some would argue that these spaces are still predicated upon principles of exclusion because they preclude men from participation, this is not the case. The rationale for male exclusion is generally rooted in awareness that men continue to pose a serious threat to female health, vitality, and autonomy. As made evident by the World Health Organization, nearly 1 in 3 women worldwide experience physical or sexual violence, which is most frequently perpetrated by intimate partners or male family members. As such, I argue, the cultivation of female-only and lesbian-only spaces can and should appear logical and beneficial to individuals who care to understand why the existence is promoted and defended. The importance of cultivating female-only and lesbian-only spaces is a concept that becomes more evident not only through exposure to statistics regarding the ubiquity and normalcy of male violence against women, but through careful contemplation of the work that feminist writers and thinkers have produced regarding the issue. In her important essay, Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence, Adrienne Rich notes that the bias of compulsory heterosexuality, through which lesbian experience is perceived on a scale ranging from deviant to abhorrent or simply rendered invisible, could be illustrated from many texts other than the 2 just preceding. The assumption made by Rossi that women are innately sexually oriented only toward men, and that made by Lessing that the lesbian is simply acting out of her bitterness toward men, are by no means theirs alone. These assumptions are widely current in literature and in the social sciences. Here, Rich conveys that heterosexuality, contrary to normative public discourses and stock stories, is not a naturally occurring, politically neutral occurrence, but rather a politicized institution, with her use of the adjective compulsory conveying the role that societal powers play at making female romantic and sexual alignment with men a requirement rather than a conscious choice of a volitional will rooted in preference. The ideology and material reality of compulsory heterosexuality is one of many reasons female-only and lesbian-only spaces are necessary. Specifically, both heterosexual and lesbian women who do not wish to place primacy upon cultivating relationships with men need spaces where they can gather and focus on other realities they find important, including political work that places primacy on acknowledging and rejecting homophobia, and manifestations of male supremacy, such as the ongoingness of rape culture, domestic violence, and the wage gap. Like Adrienne Rich, thinker and political activist Monique Wittig provides readers with an understanding of how heterosexuality and its impositions problematize female existence, particularly for those who choose to identify as lesbian. For example, in her important book, The Straight Mind, Wittig argues that lesbianism is viewed negatively because of the dominant world system being rooted in patriarchal heterosexuality. She argues that lesbianism becomes problematic within this ideological and material system because being a woman-loving woman challenges the male supremacist notion that women belong to men. Additionally, Wittig argues that pornographic images, films, magazine photos, publicity posters on the walls of the cities constitute a discourse, and this discourse covers our world with its signs, and this discourse has a meaning. It signifies that women are dominated. Together, these two assertions from Wittig convey that both the institution of heterosexuality specifically and the regime of patriarchy generally create dehumanizing limitations for women, enforcing the belief that female people belong to men, and that, within the heterosexual framework in which this belonging unfolds, women will exist and be represented through the lens of sexualized objectification. In recognizing these realities, both feminist and non-feminist women should be able to see the need for female-only and lesbian-only spaces. In a world where being female means being subordinated to men in every sphere of society, including both public and private spaces, the development of alternative female-led and female-only spaces is necessary for the purpose of organizing against male supremacy and one of its ugly arms, homophobia. As noted by radical lesbian feminist Sheila Jeffreys, all space becomes male space unless females maintain a concerted effort to mark a space for themselves. Jeffreys' assertion is correct, and we need only examine our contemporary landscape to understand how men continue to amass land and regions unto themselves and other males for the purpose of oppressing women. This reality becomes evident when we consider the nefarious, necrotic activity of pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. In the article, Epstein used Africa as playground for abuse, the writer explains that, while Jeffrey Epstein used race to filter out most black women from his U.S. sexual abuse network, the late convicted sex offender found in Africa a place to expand his business ventures and to be introduced to young women there, according to Justice Department files reported in the European and African press. Here, both feminists and non-feminists can note the way that white supremacy and male supremacy converge through the personhood of Epstein, with a convergence relating to male dominion of space by conveying how the pedophilic leader sought to extend his sphere of sexual abuse beyond the U.S. and into Africa. As many also know, Epstein utilized his private plane, Boeing 727, as a primary tool through which to advance the operations of his international sex trafficking ring. This plane was nicknamed the Lolita Express to convey its use for pedophilic purposes. Indeed, Epstein used the plane to transport underage girls and young women across both state lines and international borders. These women were transported to Epstein's various properties for the purpose of being sexually exploited in those spaces. In studying Epstein's domination of space for male supremacist purposes through property ownership and the expansion of his sex ring into Africa, we should grasp the central role that accessing space plays in either advancing patriarchal purposes or challenging them. Radical feminists have understood this concept for years and have utilized their awareness of it as the impetus to continually cultivate female-only and lesbian-only spaces through which women can seek solace from men while also actively organizing towards the development of safer, saner worlds for female people. The ongoing sociocultural, political, and economic resistance to these spaces should thus be viewed as an attack on female autonomy and flourishing, not an innocent, ethically motivated attempt to facilitate inclusion between the sexes. Men and women who want to focus on the development of egalitarian, personal, professional, and political relationships between the sexes already have innumerable co-ed and mixed gender environments through which to develop those relationships. These mixed gender environments can and should exist. So should female-only and lesbian-only spaces.
Thanks for listening to WLRN's 122nd edition podcast on the importance of lesbian-only spaces. WLRN would like to thank our guests this month for sharing their views on the topic. Thank you so much to Nicole for speaking with us. Until next time, this is Kat, signing off on another WLRN podcast.
And I'm Frida. Thanks for tuning in. Our handcrafted podcasts always come out the first Thursday of the month, so you can look for the next one on Thursday, July 2nd. If you'd like to receive our newsletter that notifies you when each podcast, music show, and interview is released, please sign up for our newsletter on the WLRNmedia.com website. Stay strong in the struggle. Thanks for listening.
And this is Margaret. For the 122nd edition of WLRN, I found some vintage images of lesbian couples and I looked up lesbian spaces. While most of the previously lesbian spaces are less specific to lesbians than in the past, in my collage I included an image of the outside of the Cubbyhole in New York City and of the Wild Side West in San Francisco. Our monthly podcasts are always crafted with tender loving care and in solidarity with women worldwide. Thanks for your support. We would love to hear from you, so please share, like, and comment widely.
If you like what you're hearing and would like to donate to the cause of feminist community radio, please visit our website and click on the donate button. Check out our merch tab to get a nice gift in exchange for your donation. And if you're interested in joining our team, send a letter of interest to info@WLRNmedia.com. We're always looking for new volunteers to conduct interviews, write blog posts, post to our social media, and do other tasks that help keep us moving forward as a collective of media activist women. Thanks for listening, and this is Anne, signing off for now.
But how will we find our way out of this? What is the antidote for the patriarchal kiss? How will we find what needs to be shown? And then after that, where is home?